Russian prisons are considered some of the scariest places not just in the country but in the entire world. In Russia, kids grow up hearing stories about prison life all the time, and young adults binge watch prison life hack videos that rack up massive views on Russian YouTube every single day. From those videos you can learn how you're supposed to enter your cell for the first time, how to answer questions from your cellmates, and even about something called kefir. That's a type of tea brewed so strong it could make you cry just from looking at it. Inside these prisons are criminals whose past crimes are so shocking it's hard to believe they once lived freely among ordinary people. The most infamous prison in Russia, and the one that strikes fear into everyone's mind, is called the Black Dolphin. It's surrounded by myths and legends, to the point that one of the most popular Russian songs is actually dedicated to it. This prison first opened back in 1773, and ever since it has terrified anyone who's ever heard of it. The exact number of inmates is unknown, but leaked reports say that in 2009 there were around 800 prisoners locked inside. And here's the chilling part: the prison staff, guards, wardens and security numbered over 1,000, so it looks like there are more guards than prisoners. And in all of its history, no one has ever escaped. The Black Dolphin is deliberately located in the middle of nowhere, in a remote village called Sol-Iletsk. Chances are you've never heard of it. And that's the point, it's isolated and brutally cold. The Black Dolphin houses criminals so terrifying you wouldn't see characters like them even in the movies. One of the men who once passed through the gates of this prison was Vladimir Nikolaev. Even among Russia's most feared criminals, Vladimir Nikolaev stands out. Next to him, the worst criminal bosses of Russia look like little kids playing in the background. One day, he stabbed a drinking buddy to death and then dismembered him. He planned to dispose of the body, but in the process, he got hungry and decided to eat the flesh. As horrifying as it sounds, his second crime is even harder to believe. This time around, Nikolaev had a particular victim in mind, and not only he killed the poor fella and ate the parts of the body, but also decided to make money from it. So he sold the meat to one of his friends, pretending it was animal meat. The friend's wife cooked it into pelmeni, a traditional Russian dumpling dish, and served it to their guests. But the taste seemed strange, suspicious. They sent the dumplings for testing. The results? They had been eating human flesh. All trails led back to Nikolaev, who will never walk free again. And Nikolaev is just one of the examples. The Black Dolphin has held some of the Russians' most infamous killers, cannibals, terrorists and perverts. And knowing that, you won't be surprised when I tell you what conditions those monsters have to deal with inside the prison. All of the prisoners are usually kept in cells of 2 to 4 inmates, rarely alone. Each cell is smaller than 5 square meters, or 50 square feet if you prefer freedom units. Before being assigned, every prisoner is interviewed by a psychologist who decides who can or cannot be placed together. The cells themselves are tiny, with triple metal doors and 24/7 video surveillance. Even the windows are blocked by layers of bars and steel doors. In other words, the inmates are caged inside another cage. Life inside the Black Dolphin is brutally harsh. Lights stay on all night. Inmates wake up at 6 a.m. sharp. For the next 16 hours they're forbidden from lying down or even sitting on their beds. They can only stand or sit on a hard stool. Guards come to check on them every 15 minutes. Prisoners do get walks, but there's a catch. Every time they leave the cell, they're handcuffed, blindfolded, and escorted by 3 guards and a dog with its handler. And even then, instead, they're taken to a small cage with bars over their heads. Yes, there's no ceiling, just open sky. But they don't get to enjoy it, since the view is blocked by a metal grate. Even the thought of escape is impossible. Their whole daily routine consists of inspections, hard labor, and aforementioned walks. The food the inmates get is scarce and laughable. It's basically bread, porridge, and thin soup that barely has anything other than water and some cheap vegetables. Alcohol, cigarettes, or any kind of outside food completely forbidden. And yet, the Black Dolphin is not the only Russian prison that terrifies people. There's another one that rivals it in both fear and reputation. It's called the Polar Owl, or Полярная сова. The Polar Owl sits way up north, in a tiny village called Harp, beyond the Arctic Circle. Winters there routinely dip to -40. You could say the whole place is built on permafrost. Originally, this camp was set up for prisoners who, back in the 1960s, were forced to build the railways of the Soviet North. But by the early 2000s, the Polar Owl had been converted into Russia's primary prison for lifers, and it's easy to see why. The compound is surrounded by endless snow, bogs, forests, and wild animals. So even if someone manages to get over the walls and fences, surviving that cold is basically impossible. Inside, things are extreme. The cells always house exactly 2 men. 23 hours a day, they stay locked in. They get 1 hour for a tiny walk. Outside the cell, inmates are forbidden from talking to or even touching each other. No handshakes, no whispers. You might wonder, well, if the place is so remote, where do they get their supplies from? The answer is simple. They don't get any supplies. The prison is mostly self-sufficient. It has its own power plant, boiler, bakery, pig farm and more. But that isolation also means horrors that never make the headlines. There have been documented cases where one prisoner murdered another in his cell over ethnic differences, while guards did nothing. 15 years ago, a scandal broke. Prison authorities had secretly placed a man among the inmates to torture and terrorize them. Under that pressure, prisoners would confess to crimes they never committed, just to make the abuse stop. Around 200 confessions were extracted in 1 year through this method. The man who orchestrated the scheme was later imprisoned for just 3 years. Overcrowding has also been reported. At some point, cells were so full they didn't have enough bunks for everyone, so inmates had to take turns to get some sleep, and some were forced to sleep on the floor. Hygiene barely exists there, although the prisoners are allowed to shower once a week for 10 minutes. That's it. The criminals locked inside the Polar All are even more vicious than those in the Black Dolphin. One of them is Alexander Pichushkin, better known as the Bitsevsky Maniac. He got that nickname from the park where he killed his victims, located right in Moscow, the capital of Russia. He's one of the record holders for the number of victims, 49 people. He wanted to fill an entire chessboard, 1 murder for every square, but his plan would never fully come to fruition. When he got arrested in 2006, he admitted that he would have kept killing. If he were ever released, he said he would continue his brutal crimes. However, he will never leave the Polar All. Back in Soviet times, he would have been executed. But since the death penalty is now abolished in Russia, the most violent criminals are sent to this prison instead. Alright, enough of this guy. Let me tell you about someone else whose story is even more shocking. Meet Ivan Panchenko, known as the Devil or Dyavel. He earned the nickname during his lifetime. Once he buried an 8-year-old girl alive. After that, he killed several more people. One of his victims was kept trapped in a pit and abused for 3 years. He was finally caught after one of his victims, an 11-year-old girl, managed to escape and brought him to justice. He, like many other serial killers, is now serving his sentence inside the Polar All. And like I said before, escaping from the Polar All is virtually impossible. Only once did an overly optimistic inmate manage to slip out of the exercise yard, and he was caught and dragged back almost immediately. But does anyone ever actually get out? Well, there's just one story. Back in the 1990s, a man was convicted of killing his neighbor and burning the victim's head in a furnace. He was sentenced to death, but at that exact moment Russia abolished the death penalty. After 25 years behind bars, he was released, and as reports go, he's already facing another 5-year sentence. The reality is stark. Russian maximum security prisons are among the most terrifying places on Earth. Inside, those locked away are stripped of basic human contact, forbidden to talk, to touch, even to lie down during the day. Their eyes are blindfolded and their hands are bound. The conditions are unbearable, and the consequences of even one successful escape would be chaos.